Welcome everybody to a very special video. A video 24 years in the making, if you want to put it that way. This is going to be my top 10 favorite films of all time. My very personal list. A list that I've been working on for a long time. I'm very excited to finally be able to articulate how I feel about these movies, put them into a list. This list is very different than the sort of list I've advertised before as my favorites. It's more so films that I just love, the movies that I could watch over and over and just always get something from, and every time I watch them, it's like a new experience. So I don't want to waste too much time talking about all that because I've got a lot to say. So why don't we just go ahead and jump into it? Boyhood, 2014, directed by Richard Linklater, starring Patty Arquette, Ethan Hawke, and Eller Coltrane. It's the cool thing to hate on Boyhood. On the surface, the plot is simple. It tells the story of Mason as he grows up in Texas. But what makes it unique is how the movie was filmed over 12 years, from 2002 to 2013, and tells the story of Mason as he grows up in Texas in real time. It captures the real emotion and struggles of growing up. It's the progression of time. Parents getting divorced and moving and relationships. It's all documented in a way that's relatable. That's what I love so much about it, how relatable it is. The level you relate to this movie is obviously dependent on the person, but I feel like it was made for me. I moved to Texas in my youth, my parents were divorced, even some of the minuscule details, waiting in line for the next Harry Potter book, and it gets real at times, including this scene that many of us have gone through.
This is the worst day of my life.
What are you talking about?
I knew this day was coming. I didn't know you were gonna be so fucking happy to be leaving.
I mean, it's not that I'm that happy. What do you expect?
You know what I'm realizing? My life is just gonna go like that. This series of milestones.
Each scene I find myself thinking, I've done this. It makes it retrospective and nostalgic in a way that's more impactful. They're playing Halo. They're predicting the release of new Star Wars movies. Leave it to the music to help set the tone and place you in that specific time. When Sheryl Crow starts playing, you remember the early 2000s and running around the neighborhood playing with your tech decks and living the good life. It's so in touch with the time, with the bush talk and clothing styles. I just feel like I'm watching myself grow up again every time I put in Boyhood. It's a personal emotional 2-hour 45-minute journey that really hits me. Let's thank Linklater for casting the roles of mom and dad perfectly with Ethan Hawke and Patty Arquette. They are so real and engrossed in their roles and add so many necessary layers to an already lasagna layered movie. It's also comedic at times, reminding us that life is funny. Boyhood is what brought the cinema scumbags and slacker media together, and quotes from the film find their way in everyday conversations. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, directed by Milos Forman, starring Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher. It's not very often that I remember the first time I saw a movie. Cuckoo's Nest is one that I do remember. I recall where I lived and how my parents told me, hey, let's watch this movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Sounds boring. And it wasn't. The character of Randall McMurphy is an interesting one. He was a brawler and gambler who found himself sentenced to a short prison sentence. What I find so unbelievably interesting is that he had himself declared insane to transfer to a mental hospital where he expected to serve his term in comparative comfort and luxury. It did not go how he planned. He instead has to deal with Nurse Ratched, who is played amazingly by Louise Fletcher. This initiates one of the great power struggles in all of film. Jack represents the American rebel, the risk taker, while Louise represents the suppressor. Randall is an insane, but he is treated as such because he teaches the other inmates to stand up for themselves and to have fun in life. When the suppressor feels she can no longer control the rebel, she takes the only measure to subdue him, transforming him to normality, ripping away his sense of individuality. The music adds a disturbing layer to an already edgy movie. I'm a big believer that music can make or break a movie. Not that this score makes or breaks this film, but it definitely benefits from it. It was also one of 3 films to win the Big 5 at the Oscars: Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Directing, and Adapted Screenplay. It also included actors in their first or early roles before they found stardom, such as Danny DeVito, Christopher Lloyd, and Brad Dourif. Kirk Douglas originated the role in a Broadway stage version and purchased the film rights to the story. After a decade of no studio willing enough to make it with him, he gave the rights to his son Michael, who succeeded in getting it produced, which won him an Oscar. The performances are excellent. Jack gives one of his best, and Louise is deliciously demented and frustrating, and I'll never be able to get over that ending.
Go.
12 Angry Men, 1957, directed by Sidney Lumet, starring Henry Fonda and Lee J. Cobb. I don't think a perfect movie exists, but I think this is the closest thing to a perfect movie. I think that lends itself to the simplicity of it. It's almost exclusively in one set, no score, and it's just 12 old guys talking. And that talking is so good. The dialogue is so well written, and not a single word is wasted in the 96-minute runtime. I love the idea that the fate of this boy is in the hands of 12 men who would rather not waste the time on deliberating, and seeing Henry Fonda make his case and slowly change the minds of those men while at the same time they question their own morals and values. It explores many techniques of consensus building and the troubles encountered in the process among a group of men whose range of personalities adds intensity and conflict with each other. It's also about how it takes is one person to elicit a change. It's the definition of a classic, and one with a lasting impression over time. The performances are stunning, and juror number 8 is one of the great heroes in film. Let's give it up for Lee J. Cobb, always great at being a huge douchebag. The camera work is impressive as well, with long takes and zoom that progressively gets closer to the characters to accentuate the claustrophobia of the room and the situation. If anybody says you need money to make a good movie, point to this. It costs only $340,000 to make. Incredible. The Apartment, 1960, directed by Billy Wilder, starring Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, and Fred McMurray. This is the most recent movie I watched for the first time. It tells the story of C.C. Baxter. In hopes of getting a promotion, allows his bosses to use his apartment for sexuals with ladies that aren't their wives. All at the same time, he is pursuing a relationship with an elevator operator, played so charmingly by Shirley MacLaine. I love the character of C.C. Baxter in all his lovable and naive glory. He's a pushover who will do whatever it takes to climb the corporate ladder. As he starts to associate with the douchebag bigwig Sheldrake, played brilliantly by Fred McMurray, he realizes not only is he using his apartment, but he's using it to be with Fran. This is when we start to see the character develop into one more involved with standing up for himself and not bending over backwards for something as material as an executive job, working for a man as selfish and manipulative as Sheldrake. As well, Shirley is so goddamn charming as Fran. It adds to the film because you understand why Baxter wants to pursue this woman. She's beautiful and interesting and kind, and you want to see him succeed in something. But as the movie goes on, it's not only about Baxter and his issues he needs to overcome, but Fran as well. It's not afraid to go to dark places, to explore the directions of human nature. And just as the film leads us to believe things will work out for the villain, director Billy Wilder subverts that expectation to something a bit more rewarding.
I love you, Miss Kubelik.
3. Queen.
Did you hear what I said, Miss Kubelik? I absolutely adore you.
Shut up and deal.
Titanic, 1997, directed by James Cameron, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. What? A big budget movie on the list? I remember the early years of watching this movie on VHS. The tube tape pack, and I would always skip over the first tape and get right to the good stuff. Right as the tape begins, Rose gets a good one across the cheek. Of course, as I got older, I watched the full thing and realized you can't get the full effect of tape 2 without tape 1. It's not about the shipwreck, it's about the romance. We've seen the star-crossed lovers during a historical tragedy before. Titanic started this. At one time, it was the highest grossing film of all time at $2.187 bajillion. And I think what is crazy to me is that this was a big budget melodrama that was not only critically acclaimed and a box office nutbuster, but also completely swept the Oscars. The acting is on point from everyone and really sells the terror of the situation. There are so many scenes that are so effective because of the performances on display. The fear, or the acceptance, or the emotion. It all works. Set pieces are nothing short of spectacular. The chaos feels real, and I think a lot of that has to do with the presence of one of the best scores ever put to film. A moment of silence for James Horner. The combination of the scene with Horner's composition accentuates the emotion and the levity of the situations, as exampled in my personal favorite music-visual combination in the film. To most, it's just a nothing scene, but the combination packs a punch. The raw emotion in that scene alone is 100 times more natural and effective than any other $200 million film. It's very rare in a film to combine both spectacle and heart and do it effectively. Titanic is that rare exception. In Cameron's own words, he said, All my films are love stories, but in Titanic I finally got the balance right. It's not a disaster film, it's a love story with a fastidious overlay of real history. It also introduced us to key players in the acting game. The luscious and beautiful Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, both who have since gone on and had illustrious careers. This is another film that went on to win Best Picture in a year it completely demolished. Titanic was a cultural phenomenon and gave us one of the great quotes and great songs of the generation. I've tried for a while to figure out why it became as popular as it did, and I never could. So I'll let these smart people explain it. Author Alexander Keller, when analyzing Titanic's success, stated that scholars could agree that the film's popularity appears dependent on contemporary culture, on perceptions of history, on patterns of consumerism and globalization, as well as on those elements experienced filmgoers conventionally expect of juggernaut film events in the 1990s. Awesome screen spectacle, expansive action, and more rarely seen, engaging characters and epic drama. At the end, we see Rose in her bed. It's been debated whether she's asleep or dead. What do you think? In my morbid view, I think she's dead. It's a Wonderful Life, 1939, directed by Frank Capra, starring James Stewart and Donna Reed. Everyone has a film that guarantees to make them cry, right? Even writing the script and talking about this movie gets me emotional because of how beautiful the story is, how heartwarming the finale is, and how James Stewart is perfect as the everyman George Bailey. It's not always heartwarming though, at times becoming dark and exploring the themes of greed, misery, and exploitation. I remember this being one of those films that always played around Christmas that I avoided because it was a black and white movie. As my taste matured, I realized how wrong I was. I think what is so infectious about it is its optimistic outlook on not only the world but people in general. You never know how many people you directly or indirectly affect with your actions. This is the goal of Clarence when he takes George through time to see how others would be without him in their life. Every character is delightful and charming in their own way, but not without their faults. The ones that aren't are dastardly in their own way, but that's what makes him such a great character. Lionel Barrymore is the worst in the best way. There's so much emotion oozing in every scene, from the drugstore scene to I Want to Live Again, and even to Mary Hatch whispering in George's deaf ear.
George Bailey, I'll love you till the day I die.
And Donna Reed is a fox in this movie. She's the embodiment of class and sophistication and does nothing but cares for and loves George. You also have Gloria Graham in one of her earliest roles. She plays a flirtatious character that many people around town see as a bit of a lush, but of course there are many more layers to her character than that. And leave it to George Bailey to save her from disgrace and see who she really is. It's a story of redemption, just as George had come to the aid of many in the city. They all come to the aid of him in his time of need. It's a joy to sit through this movie, and you can't help but feel something when the singing starts. American Beauty, 1999, directed by Sam Mendes, starring Kay Space, Annette Bening, and Thora Birch. As much as this film may come off as a pervy movie on the surface, it's much deeper than that. For one, it's a satire. A dark one at that. It's honestly one of the films on this list that is probably the most themes and different interpretations, some of which include redemption, imprisonment, and of course, beauty. The beauty aspect intersects with the major theme of conformity, which is wonderfully conveyed through the character of Angela. She's shallow and obsessed with her looks, while Jane yearns to be different. This all changes for both as their characters develop through the runtime. I love the idea in films of dissecting middle-class suburbia, the perfect representation of what everybody wants to be. Films like Happiness, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, The American Beauty, The Red Roses and White Picket Fence, and seeing how imperfect and hollow the existence of those that live that life is. There's so much stunning cinematography, and of course the iconic shot of Angela on a bed of roses is perfection. Used to symbolize his desire for her, it also deals with his ever-growing individuality, as he began in drab colors and slowly is surrounded with the color red. One shot that is a little subtler that really represents the theme of imprisonment is this one, reflecting a man in a jail cell, waiting to break free. And how ironic that the end of the movie, after Lester finally breaks free from the chains of responsibility and conformity, that he dies at the hands of another individual, still imprisoned, in their own sexually frustrated and repressed personality. All because he is so shameful of who he is as a homosexual that he will murder the only person who knows his secret. Colonel Fitz was based a bit on screenwriter Alan Ball's father. I could go on forever talking about the themes of the film, but you get it. There's a lot and they represent very relatable issues that everyone relates to. Of course, you can't can't forget the music, a very cryptic, unorganized score that represents the fantasies of Lester, until the score begins to creep into real-life situations, as his fantasies begin to assert themselves into actuality. The casting is basically perfection throughout. Each character exudes personality from each actor, and they are played in a way that they are all flawed, but you can still sympathize with them. I remember the first time watching and seeing that little girl from Hocus Pocus, and was completely surprised. Crazy enough, the film ended up winning Best Picture, which says a lot, and I think what helped the movie become so brash and unapologetic was a cynical outlook that was influenced by Ball's frustrating time writing for several sitcoms. As the tagline suggests, look closer, because there's so much beauty in the world. The Graduate, 1967, directed by Mike Nichols, starring Dustin Hoffman, Anne Bancroft, and Catherine Ross. One thing that occurred with most of these movies was after a first time viewing, I liked the film, and then I start to think about the movie. It marinates in my head. The fascination grows. And then I watch it again and everything clicks. And it's a movie that I can't seem to get over. It deals with issues we've all faced and ones that I've dealt with recently in life. The moral and psychological growth from youth to adulthood, trying to figure out your path in life, but at the same time being seduced by your parents' family friend. And who could blame him? That's also the obscurity of the film that works so well at adding humor and further drama when he begins to fall in love with the daughter of the woman who seduces him. Dustin Hoffman is perfect as the geeky, awkward Benjamin Braddock. This film is why Hoffman is one of my faves. Catherine Ross plays Elaine, who is a serious film crush, not only because of her beauty, but how intriguing she is. Mrs. Robinson has become a sort of iconic figure in pop culture, obviously inspiring a song done by Simon and Garfunkel, who, in turn, had many of their songs used for the film. And it's good music too. A lot of people use Sounds of Silence ironically in videos, but the song is amazing in its usage in this. It's almost cryptic in its sound, especially in the end. Let's take it back a bit. This is another reason I love the movie. It's very realistic in its portrayal of the relationship between Benjamin and Elaine. When you first start to date someone, you become infatuated. The two become smitten. Benjamin wants to marry Elaine immediately. They've only ever been on one date. But then she finds out he had an affair with her mother, which also, let me take another second to point out the mastery of this scene. As Elaine begins to figure out about the affair, the camera focuses from Mrs. Robinson back to Elaine, slowly signifying the realization in the focus. Genius. Anyway, after the two break it off, Elaine starts to date a guy that her parents do approve of. They are then to be married while Benjamin does what he can to get her back. We then get to the wedding. Benjamin crashes it just in time. Elaine has to make the decision to do what her parents want or what she wants. In a bit of brilliant visual storytelling, she makes the rash decision to leave behind her family, her soon-to-be husband, and the life she knew for Ben, a guy she really didn't know that well. Things might end up fine. They might not. As they ride off on the bus in one of my favorite endings ever, they start to come to the realization, what did we do? Did we make the right decision? Saving Private Ryan, 1998, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks and Matt Damon. Wow, this looks like a truly heartfelt story. Oh my god! This is a visual representation of the viewing experience of Saving Private Ryan. Before you even know what's happening, it socks you right in the mouth. It's only right that a World War II film is on my list, considering it seems like that's the only films I ever watch. Let's start out with the realism. While I myself have not fought in World War II, so I can't say this for sure, but according to many World War II veterans, this is the most realistic depiction of war ever put to screen. So much so that it triggered PTSD in many vets, and a hotline was set up for those affected. It's not done in a glorified manner. It's necessary. At its core, Private Ryan is an anti-war film. The aspects of the Omaha beach landing are beyond perfection. The documentary style it's shot in, the lack of music, the chaotic nature of character interactions. It's 20 minutes of hectic, non-stop insanity. Realism is further conveyed in the sound design, which is essential in a war film. Bullets ting and explosions rattle, and you get perfect examples of great sound design such as this. And let me give you an example of why Steven Spielberg is one of the best. In this scene, the Americans make light of the situation, believing to have killed Nazis. But when you find out what was said, things change.
What? What? I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying.
Since these soldiers claim to be Czech, they were most likely conscripted into the German army when Czechoslovakia was conquered by Germany in 1939. This is not meant to be a history lesson, but this is the genius of Spielberg. He could have reflected this in subtitles, which would have taken the viewer out of the levity and confusion of the entire invasion. The scale is large and the tone is gritty, and it works so well to put you in the shoes of the badasses that were brave enough to take on this massive endeavor. And it works well to put you in that scenario. You feel the fear. You feel the tanks incoming as they make the ground tremble. Another film that won Best Picture on the list.
Shakespeare in Love.
Oh. Well, it's still a great, historically accurate movie that will always sit among the best war films of all time. Shawshank Redemption, 1994, directed by Frank Darabont, starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. This will be hard to put into words that live up to how good this movie is. It's number 1 on IMDb's user-generated top 250 list. Case closed. Surprisingly, Shawshank was not as highly regarded when it first came out. It premiered as the number 9 film the week it was released, and after 10 weeks in theaters made around $16 million, a box office bomb. What saved the film was award nominations and home video rentals. Warner Home Video had the ballsy idea to ship 320,000 VHS tapes throughout the country, and it went on to become the top rented film of the year. As well, the cable rights were sold to TBS, where it was shown on TV, which is where I saw it for the first time. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why I love this film. I can muster it could be a combination of the setting, time period, story, music, and acting. To be honest, that's why anyone likes movies, but the mixture is perfect. I think it's also the mystery of the character of Andy Dufresne. He's an enigma. Why is he so reserved? Did he or didn't he do it? You're led to believe he killed his wife because he never quite defends himself. He keeps to himself, and as the judge says,
"You strike me as a particularly icy and remorseless man, Mr. Dufresne. It chills my blood just to look at you."
Darabont, and to an extension Stephen King, reveals to you all the information they want to tell you until the truth comes out. The entire movie is an example of slowly revealing more and more layers to the story. Why did Andy want the rock hammer? Or Rita Hayworth? Why did he want a length of rope? When everything is revealed, Andy walks into the bank and the warden realizes he's been had. It's one of the greatest moments in cinema. The characters feel so lived in, as if they had been around before the movie and they'll be around after the movie. Red is the voice of reason in an uncivilized setting, and Andy is an everyman. And for a movie so imbued in a world of dampened spirits and inhumane treatment, it has a surprising amount of humanity and gentle care, and you can't forget this shot. And those are my top 10 films of all time. Let me know what you think of them. I'm very happy that I was able to finally construct a list of 10 movies in my whole life that I've seen that I loved more than any others. It was a lot of work and a lot of talking, but that's why you come to a movie channel, right? To listen to people talk about movies. In conclusion, I love movies. Let me know down below what your top 10 favorites are, or even just some of your favorites. I'm always happy to hear what you guys have to say. Would love to know what your lists are or what your favorite is. Thank you guys, as always, for watching, and we'll see you next time.